Good afternoon. Welcome to the Adult Religious Catechesis, the Adult Faith Formation of Good Shepherd Catholic Church. I am Suzanne Printy. I'm the coordinator of the Mercy and Justice Core Community. And to my left is Kelly McGrath, an attorney and the executive director, correct, of the Florida Restorative Justice Association. And to my right, your left, is Agnes Furey, co-author of Wildflowers in the Median, and has a lot to say about restorative justice and how it has affected her life. Today we are going to be discussing restorative justice, kind of an explanation of what it is, participation, the desired outcome, and then also a program that Agnes is involved in that is Achieve Higher Ground. Is that correct? And how that relates to restorative justice. So we're going to start with a summary, I guess, of restorative justice and how it works from Kelly, and then Agnes will tell her story and how restorative justice has affected her life. Then we'll go into some questions, and then we'll have adult audience questions after that. So, Kelly.
Okay, thank you. I just want to start with the umbrella idea of restorative practices. Restorative justice is a subset of restorative practices, but restorative practices believes that people are happier, more cooperative, and more productive, more likely to make positive changes in their lives when people in positions of authority do things with them rather than to them or for them. And that's from the International Institute of Restorative Practices. So those type of practices would look like formal processes or informal processes that precede wrongdoing and build trust and community and relationships to prevent crime and wrongdoing in the first place. And so something like a dialogue circle to talk about your feelings about an issue. We could do that after a police shooting or after a crime had occurred, before any kind of sentencing, or classrooms where they would use that in the morning to talk about, their favorite thing in life, or how to make the classroom run better. So restorative justice is a subset of that, and that's actually the reactive side. So after something happens, after there's a conflict or a crime, it consists of formal and informal processes that respond to crime and wrongdoing after it occurs in a way that helps heal the victim as well as the community. And one thing that Howard Zehr is a criminologist, and he's considered one of the fathers of restorative justice. He believes that restorative justice is not, it asserts that a harmful act isn't just a crime against the state or against one person, but actually a rip in the fabric of community. And if we can help repair that rip, that needs to involve everyone that's impacted by the crime, including the person who did the harm and their support system, the person who was harmed, of course, and their support system, and the wider community if possible. So right now, the criminal justice system that we have right now, it asks 3 questions. What law was broken, who broke it, and what is the punishment? And restorative justice asks different questions. It asks who was harmed, who owns the obligations to repair the harm, and what are those obligations? And it's basically a process to involve, to the extent possible, those who have a stake in the specific outcome, and to collectively identify and address harms, needs, and obligations in order to heal and put things as right as possible. The process is victim-driven. So if the person who was harmed wants to do this process, then it should take place. And that's the bottom line. The other parameters that need to be met are that the person who did the harm has to admit accountability and want to make things as right as possible. So if those parameters are met, then a trained facilitator will meet with each person individually and talk to them about what happened and what you were thinking at the time and what you might have been needing at the time and feeling at the time. And what do you need to heal and move on with your life? And then who else is involved? Who else needs to be at this circle? And make it as wide as possible. And then after everyone is has been talked to individually, then they would meet together collectively with the facilitator. And then they would ask questions like, who's been hurt, what are their needs, what are their obligations? Everyone in the circle would have a chance to tell their story and to be deeply heard and listened to. And then if there's a possibility of some agreement being made to repair harm, then that could be an outcome. Restorative justice, there's several different points in the process once harm has happened that this could take place. So it could take place before any type of sentencing, if this is a court situation, if there's been an arrest. There's a specific rule, 3.171 of the Florida Rules of Criminal Procedure, that allows the defense attorney and the prosecuting attorney to come together and meet confidentially. And that's what has been used in Florida in one specific case so far. And then after sentencing, if the person who did the harm has already been sentenced and the person who was harmed wants to meet, and the person who did the harm agrees to meet, that would be called a victim-offender dialogue. And that would be, the same parameters would be made as far as the trained facilitator talking to each person individually, and then they would meet together. And that is not currently happening in Florida. There's no specific rule against it, but that's a policy, an unwritten policy that the Department of Corrections has that we feel very hopeful will change very soon. They've already been trained in victim offender dialogue, so they know the importance of it, and they did ask for a position last session, but that wasn't, last legislative session, but that wasn't passed. So we're hopeful that this victim offender dialogue will be allowed to happen in Florida. And in Leon County right now, we have a community connections program where teens who've been arrested or about to be expelled are referred to a program that has a restorative justice circle in the beginning. So everyone impacted by the event is talked to one-on-one, and then they're invited to come into the circle together, and agreements can be reached. And then the teen who did the harm has 13 weeks with the support of the community connection staff at the Palmer Monroe Teen Center to help work their agreement and honor their agreement. And then another circle will be held at the end, and everyone gets to talk about what has happened in between and if that agreement's been honored, and talk to the victim and ask them truly, deeply, do they feel like things have been made as right as possible? And if that happens, then no other court process or school process continues on. That is the end of it for that person. So we're really happy. This has been going on for over 2 years now. They have a lot of data so far, and the people who have been harmed are very satisfied that they feel deeply heard, and that the agreements helped them move forward. And I've been involved in several of those facilitated dialogues. Also, the Department of Children and Families just hired a restorative justice coordinator to work with foster care group homes, where kids who are in foster care but don't have a foster parent will live in a group home with 8 or 10 other children, and usually 2 or more staff workers. And there's been the Department of Children and Families does not have authority. We don't run the group homes. That's contracted out by statute. And we're finding, I work at the Department of Children and Families, by the way, I didn't say that, I'm a lawyer there. We're finding that the outcomes for the children are very poor, and the staff call the police often if there's a situation where one child may steal from another child's bedroom or get in a fight. Instead of acting like they're the parent in a home where you would deal with that internally, they will call the police, and children will be arrested and moved to another group home, which really re-traumatizes kids that have already been traumatized. So I think it's a giant move for the state. It's a very bold and courageous move for our state, and I'm helping them. Boys Town is the group home in Tallahassee that's allowing us to go in there and train their staff in these better methods, these proactive restorative practices, and then use restorative justice when there is a problem in the group home. Also, Leon County's has something called a civil citation program right now. So the police officer at the scene can directly, instead of arresting for certain crimes or conflicts, can directly refer a child, a teenager, to this community connections program. And we would like to see an adult version of that here in town as well. So hopefully we will do that. But basically, restorative justice is a process where a trained facilitator will help the parties get together and talk about what happened. People get to ask questions. Why did you choose me to rob? Were you following me? You know, here's the harm that's happened. I didn't just lose, my car wasn't just wrecked. I was going to a job interview and I didn't get that. And now this happened. Like, you really get to fully talk about the impact and what can make things as right as possible. And, I think it's important because I would like to have a say in what happens afterwards if I'm harmed, not the court who knows nothing about my needs or my life. And if the process doesn't work, if the agreement is not honored, that process can still move forward. The court process it's on pause during that time, and it can still move forward. So the traditional system can still be a part of it if needed. But I'm so strongly passionate about this because I've heard from so many people who were harmed how much of a deeper healing was gained by having a say and being heard, truly heard. So that is my, I don't want to take up too much time, but I'm open for questions or however we want to do this.
I think it'd be best if we hold our questions, if you have any, to after we're finished, and then you all can ask questions at that time, but hold your thoughts at this moment so we can now hear Agnes's story.
Good afternoon. Okay, Agnes's story. Some years ago, we're coming up now on 20 years ago, my daughter and my grandson were murdered. And in the car with a friend of mine who was driving, because nobody would let me drive to where it occurred, and we were on I-75. And I remember in the car I said something to her about, someday I'm going to talk with this man. And proceeded to forget about that pretty quickly. He had initially confessed to the crime from the first moment he was contacted. But according to the adversarial court system, he had to plead not guilty so that they could proceed and go to court. And he had asked to plead guilty and get the death penalty. And his attorney talked him out of that and told him he couldn't do that. So they were going to go to trial, and the state attorney in the circuit where it occurred, he really, really wanted to get a death penalty conviction. Nobody asked me my opinion at all. Before we went to court, I had never really had any particular feelings about the death penalty. It just wasn't on my radar, like most people. It's not something we think about unless something triggers that thought process. So now I'd been triggered. So now I was researching and trying to learn as much as I could about it. And the more I learned, the less I liked. And I never really, really wanted him killed. I wanted him to be accountable, but I never wanted him killed. And then I had been given to understand at this point in time that we would go to court probably in another 6 months. And I got a phone call at work on a Thursday afternoon telling me that they'd reached an agreement for him to plead guilty to 2 counts of capital murder with life sentence and take the death penalty off the table, and there wouldn't be a trial. And did I agree to that? Well, it wasn't just my feelings. It was also other members of my daughter's family. And oh, by the way, we need to know tomorrow because we're going to have the hearing on Monday. So I had to contact my daughter's former husband and Christopher's biological father and get their opinion if they would fight for the death penalty. And neither one of them were thrilled with the hearing idea, but neither one of them felt strongly enough that they wanted to kill him to object. So I called them on Friday and said, okay. So the hearing was going to be on Monday. Now, in my research, the one thing I did know was that I could make a victim impact statement in court. But I had no clue what a victim impact statement should look like. So on Friday afternoon, I called as many members of clergy in different faith communities, rabbis and priests and ministers and anybody I could think of, and said, I got to do this by Monday, and please pray for me. So on Sunday at noon, I figured, well, if they were praying, they should be done by now. So I got out a word processor and started writing, and I had no idea how to begin or what I was going to do. And I wrote until, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 o'clock in the morning. And printed it out. It was 9 pages. And then I took a shower, and I got in the car, and I drove to Sarasota to the court. And then I realized during that process that when you make a victim impact statement to the court, you literally make the statement to the court, not to the defendant. You're directing it to the judge, and the defendant is behind you. So it doesn't give you any sense that you're making your voice heard to the defendant. And the prosecuting attorney looked at my statement and said, well, I guess it's all right. And then in the open court, he said to the judge, he said, she has a statement to make. It's a little lengthy, but I think it's appropriate. Oh, thank you. If you cared about how it was, then maybe a little guidance would have been helpful. So I wrote that statement and I gave it to the court. Now, during those first days and after the murder, one of the things I became aware of, I was sitting in a police station in the office with a detective, and she had just gotten off the phone from notifying the defendant's grandmother. And while she was on the phone with her, the woman had a heart attack. And it was very clearly apparently to me that that phone call to her was as traumatic as the phone call had been to me. And as part of the restorative philosophy that restorative justice is a part of, then it matters that everybody that's been affected by the harm that's been done by an individual needs to be part of the process. Then over the years, I got the opportunity to participate in several conferences and a number of things that made me more and more aware and educated on restorative justice. I did get to meet Howard Zehr, he made a big impact on me. And probably about 5 years after I came to the realization that I think maybe it's time that I talk with this man. And then I found that no, I couldn't do that. Florida wasn't going to allow me to talk to him. And I talked to administration, I talked to chaplains, talked to a lot of people. I talked to their victim service person, and nobody had any interest in any kind of restorative process. So I wrote to him. Said, well, if I can't talk to him, I can write to him. And I had no idea what I was going to say. And I rented a post office box. And I won't spend time getting into why I rented a post office box, but that's another story. But I rented a post office box, and I still procrastinated. And then I kind of started yelling at myself. You spent the money, you rented the box, now do it. So it was early January. It was shortly after Christmas, and I was sitting there with a pad trying to figure out what am I going to write, and I looked and I had a box of leftover Christmas cards, and I had these cards that were had no greeting, nothing on the inside, no words on the front, just a silhouette of a dove. And I thought, well, okay, there's nothing threatening about that. So I sent him the card with the dove and said something about that he'd been on my mind for years and I hoped he was well, and sent it. And I got back a letter saying, this is very nice, and I'm sorry if I insult you that I don't know who you are, but I don't know anybody in Florida. He didn't know who I was. All he knew was I was Pat's mom, but he didn't know my name. So when he got the note, he didn't know who it was from, and he was racking his brain trying to figure out who I could be. And he very nicely said, you must be a nice lady because this is written on recycled paper. Pissed me off. More than even that he didn't know who I was. Somehow or another, that just... so I wrote him back and said, how the hell can you not know who I am? You killed my daughter and grandson. You've changed my life forever. And I didn't scare him off. He answered me. And he's all apologetic, and he talked a lot, and it was a very nice letter, and we continued to correspond over a number of years. And after several years of corresponding, and then eventually we talked some on the telephone, we each realized that we'd had our own healing, and we had several maybe breakthrough conversations. One time he was really despondent and said, I'm never going to be anything more than a murderer. And I've been trained in people first language. And I wrote back and I said, you're not a murderer, you're a man who has murdered. And that made a difference for him. And it is a different concept. And it's a reality. You know, it's not who we are, it's what we've done, which may or may not be who we are. And the other one was, he said, well, what can I do? Well, you can't fix it. What you can do is make a difference where you are. You know, I believe that we all live in community, and we all impact each other whenever we have an interaction, whether we plan it or not. And he was living in a community, a closed community. There's a lot of work to be done. And I said, you can make a difference where you are. And he took that very, very seriously. And he sat down and he wrote a curriculum for other inmates to get in touch with their accountability. And he put it in practice in 2 of the prisons where he was. And he had what he felt was some positive responses from a number of the inmates, and a lot of negative responses from the institutions. It's alien to what a lot of people learn when they study corrections, unfortunately. So he's written this program, and he still does what he can to work with other inmates to carry the message that they can make a difference for what they've done. Unfortunately, we still have not gotten a restorative justice program in Florida in the adult system. I am hopeful for a lot of things. One of the things that I just found out in recent days is that Griffin Middle School is instituting a restorative philosophy in the school. So, yeah, I believe it's an important way of looking at things.
So the program that Leonard is the is the offender in this situation that he's instituting, is that the Achieve Higher Ground? And is that essentially a victim-offender dialogue or not? Or is that something different?
No, it hasn't gotten to the place of victim-offender dialogue. It's more for the offender. It would probably be like when you were talking about a facilitator talking with an inmate about what they've done. It's a way where a number of inmates can come together and they can share and facilitate themselves. There are some programs in some prisons that are peer facilitated programs. And Doris here facilitates one of those programs twice a week. And I had an opportunity to attend some of the peer facilitated programs in one of our local prisons, and they can be extremely powerful. You know, nobody can reach an inmate better than another inmate. You know, we all talk about how they can learn how to be, you know, better bad guys in prison. They can also learn how to be better good guys from other guys.
All right, well, I have a couple of questions here that I need to, or I'd like to get out. And first of all, Kelly, you said that this is victim-driven. And you also said that it's, that the offender must voluntarily participate. So I'm going to be kind of a devil's advocate here and ask you, you know, how can this be a voluntary participation if it's pre-trial, pre-sentence, and there's a possibility that the offender can get a lighter sentence? How is that not a manipulative situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do want to say that's not an issue with the victim offender dialogue because the person's already has their sentence, right? So pre-sentence, what I've done, what the reading that I've done on this is that persons who do harm They often report that the hardest thing they've done was to face the person and their families that they've hurt, and much harder than standing back and kind of anonymously letting the state flow them through their system without having to actually face the person that they've harmed. Now, I mean, that wasn't the actual question, but I guess the thought is it actually voluntary if someone knows that they could come away with a different outcome than jail time? And that is a concern, and that's one of the reasons why the facilitator will meet with the person who did the harm first before there's an agreement to meet in a circle. In addition, that doesn't mean that there won't be jail time. The only case that in the nation that they've used restorative justice for a very serious case was a murder case here in Tallahassee, and that did result in jail time as part of the agreement. So it definitely doesn't mean that there won't be jail time, or that the jail time won't be exactly the same as they would have gotten had the court imposed it. There could actually be jail time and other things that the person harmed needs to heal. So there might be like additional jail time plus additional tasks. So I haven't come across anything that ever showed that someone tried to get out of jail time by doing that. It's actually much harder. The people have reported it's much more difficult to face someone that you've harmed and their family. And you would have to admit accountability at that point as well. So yeah.
Yeah, and the reality is that we have plea deals every day where negotiated settlements are done between prosecutors and defense attorneys, and agreements on penalties. Those are done without any input from the victims or the perpetrators. It's done so the deal in the amount of whatever is assigned is done without any benefit coming out of it.
Right.
Because it's blind. It's just the district attorney and the defense attorney coming together and deciding what the sentence is going to be. So that's not unusual. It's done every day.
And so this would be different from that because
It's the added benefit of being able to have your voice heard and
some kind of positive outcome. Yeah.
Right, and even for the person the person who did the harm, their family, it also heals. We're all a community, so it's the victim and their family, of course, that drives this process. But the people who did harm, the person who did harm and their family are also going to be living in this community. We would love them to be a fully functional member of this community as well. So, and there might be some needs that they have too that can be explored in this process.
So how is the restorative justice system that precedes, or actually, that precedes the sentence and precedes the trial, how does that differ from the victim-offender dialogue that you would like to see, that doesn't occur in the state of Florida, but you would like to see?
I believe that it would be set up through the victim services, through the Attorney General's office or the state attorney's office.
But that occurs after
that would be
sentence.
after the
Or
sentencing
the
would
Department
happen.
of Corrections has victim
That's true.
services.
Right.
Yeah, and there are 30-some states with functioning programs. The first state to have a victim offender dialogue program was Texas. And they've been in business now for, 15, 20 years. The early 90s, they started their first program. They do dialogues on death row. But 30-some states have functioning programs, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And a lot of those states are more than willing to hand over their procedure manual.
And so the offenders are willing to participate in this, even though they aren't to get anything? Like, what is their motivation to participate? What do they get out of that?
They get their own healing.
Yeah, I spoke to Connor. I don't know if we're going to talk to you or not, but anyway, I was in Wakulla prison, and I talked to Connor McBride, who was part of this national case, and he was able to go through this process with the people that he harmed, and he stated to me that he came to prison with an open heart and an open mind, and is mentally healthy as can be, having harmed someone to that level, but that there's so many people there that wish that they could just reach out and say, I really messed up, and this is what happened, and I can't tell you how sorry I am, but I will try to do better. And, just people don't have an opportunity to do that. And I think that's what it gives them.
That's another thing. If an inmate decides he really wants to apologize and gets in touch with a member of the victim's family or sends a letter to the victim's family, they can get some serious consequences for them. That's not acceptable. They can't say they're sorry.
Unless it's initiated
Unless
by
it's-
the victim's family.
Even if the family would be receptive to receiving that kind?
No, they're not permitted to contact the family at all.
So this is, you said this is victim initiated? How is it done? How is it started?
For the just for the pre-sentencing or for victim offender
Well,
dialogue?
let's say pre-sentencing.
So, in our state, we only have right now for teens, and it would be a diversion program. Courts can set up diversion programs. I'm sure you've heard of Teen Court. That's a diversion program. Community Connections is a diversion program. So there's a sentencing, there's an arrest, and then every Tuesday, all of the diversion program representatives meet, and the state attorney's office will give them the list of the files of the kids, and they will decide which child goes in which diversion program.
How is
So
that
that would-
in victim initiated?
Yeah, so what happens then is once they get in Community Connections, the Community Connections volunteer will call the person who was harmed and say, there's a possibility to do this, do you want to do this? And if the answer is no, then there's no trying to convince the person in any way. It's just thank you. And then that file goes back to the state attorney's office and the normal process continues. Okay. Now, we don't have a process where the person who harmed can ask. What I would like to see in Leon County is the victim services says, hey, there's this other thing that we can do. We can, if you would like to meet with the person who did harm for you, to you, we can help you set that up, and here's what it would look like, and here's what would happen if you went through with it. And you can stop. Also, another thing is you can stop at any time. Anyone in the circle can halt the process, and then the normal process would continue. So I would like to see something like that set up in the Second Circuit where the victim advocate offers this. And then if the person says yes, then they would go to the state attorney's office and see if the person admitted accountability and wants to make things better.
New Hampshire has a program where every time somebody is admitted into the correctional system, the victim is immediately notified that they have an opportunity to request a dialogue. And I think Colorado has something similar.
But since we don't have that, there is some determination as to who is appropriate, where it goes, if it's appropriate to be in this restorative justice pile, or if it's more appropriate to be in this other pile over here. So how is that determination made, and is there a possibility for some discrimination there to have white kids who are better off, but over here in this restorative justice
Yeah.
pile as opposed to this.
I think there's always a possibility of any type of discriminatory action, especially with the institutionalized racism that we see nowadays. But I actually cannot speak to how they decide who goes to teen court because I'm not a fan of teen court. I believe that's just teaching kids about the normal system and it's not helping the victim in any way. But I know that the person who runs the Community Connections program, Dr. Cindy Bigby, will look at the file, and if there's any, especially if there's something in there where they said, yeah, I did it, or you got me, or something indicating that they admitted accountability, or sometimes it's a fight in school, so both children involved will be asked if they want to attend. But it's definitely a question of if they admit accountability, because that's number one. We don't want to bring anyone into the circle that feels like they didn't do harm or wasn't their fault.
All right, Amy, what questions do we have from the audience? Sherry.
Is there, at Florida State, there is a big criminology
Mhm.
department there. Is there anything being taught on restorative justice there?
Not in the criminology program. In the social work program, there's a very, very good class on social work in criminal justice that focuses on restorative justice. But the criminology program, no.
And I will say that University of Florida they have a conflict and crime, like a mediation, a restorative justice type of program there, and I think it's actually called restorative justice for their campus crimes. And they, once they start the campus police, when they investigate the crime, if the person admits accountability, then they can be sent there first, and then the people who run that program will contact the person who was harmed and ask if they want to do this process. And the whole spectrum of options afterwards could still happen. They could still go to jail, but it gives the person who was harmed the right to speak to them directly.
I was just going to go off on that. I'm actually a student at Florida State University. I'm a graduate student in the social work and criminology program.
Okay.
So I have a little bit of both. But I actually took Dr. Tripodi's class.
Okay.
That's where I heard you speak first. And that class does mainly focus on restorative justice. In my experience with the criminology department, I'm in a capital punishment class now. So we're kind of breezing over it, but not necessarily like that's the main focus.
There are a few colleges that, not in Florida, but that have master's degree programs just in restorative justice, Minnesota.
Does the College of
But-
Law at FSU?
No, the College of Law at FSU does not. I graduated from FSU. I've already talked to them about starting some type of program. They have a mediation and alternative dispute resolution and mediation component to that you can take. You don't have to, but I would love to see restorative justice be part of that program. And actually, I did talk to Professor Larry Krieger about starting restorative justice, like an internship where people could start working that. And he's trying to talk to the powers that be around doing something around that, which would be a wonderful thing for our county for sure.
I have a question about the actual process.
Oh, yeah.
In your experience, what kinds of affected people have been invited to and
Yeah.
elect to participate in the circles?
Yeah, so a typical one that I've done a few of them, obviously for Community Connections, but in one case, we had 3 boys. They were 12 to 14. They were out at 10 o'clock at night, cousins. They were throwing rocks at each other and just getting into minor mischief, and threw a rock and hit a community center window and broke it. And an older lady, was outside, and she was fearful and called the police, and they arrested the boys. At the circle, we invited her. We invited her family, because since then she was more and more nervous because she wasn't aware of the reasons why, what the boys were doing. There was thoughts that they were casing her house or someone else's house. We invited the people from the community center who had to pay about $300 to get the window fixed, which couldn't go to other teen programs that they wanted to do. We invited, of course, all the boys' parents, and two of them declined to participate, and one child's family decided to participate. So it was his grandmother and his other siblings. And then we invited other people from the community, and 2 other neighbors showed up from the community that happened. And at first, I have to say, the grandmother was not happy to be there in any way. And she was really upset about the time that this could take out of her busy day, because she's caring for her grandkids. So other things are happening in her family life. But by the end of it, the boy made a decision on his own that he was going to get into the house before dark and stay there every night. He was given a watch by one of the neighbors. Another neighbor offered to call him at 7 o'clock every night to make sure he was in, and if he wasn't, he would go pick him up and bring him to the house. The community center had invited the boy to help start a little badge bike riding program where you kind of earn badges for how many miles you ride. And the boy agreed to work at the community center to kind of work off, or volunteer at the community center, really, because he wasn't getting paid, to work off the cost of the window. So as wide as a net as possible, I would be my answer, because these people are not just going to jail and staying there forever, especially if they're children, but they're going to be part of that community. So as many people as you can get from that community would be, and if anyone has a problem with that, we would always ask the person who was harmed if that's okay. Because that person who was harmed I've never experienced this, but they may only want the person who did the harm there. For whatever privacy reasons or for whatever reasons. So we would respect and honor that, of course. Yeah.
I understand there's some certification processes for restorative justice, both in New Zealand and California, I believe.
Not in the United States, but in New Zealand there is. California would like there to be more standards. Colorado has standards. The Colorado standards are not as much certification as they are. We agree that this is a voluntary process. We agree that it's victim-driven. There's agreements that the people who want to do restorative justice will agree to. And then they'll give their training, like here's where I was trained, and this is what the training consisted of. Florida Restorative Justice Association, we have about 200 members now, and that is one of the discussions that we're having right now, because while we want everyone to have the philosophy down, we don't want to make this process, the training process, prohibitive cost-wise for anybody, because especially we want people in communities to learn how to do this for their community. So if there is a break-in or if there's a police shooting or something, then the community can immediately start acting and meet in circle and start talking about it. But my concern for not having certification, I'm a lawyer and I'm kind of type A, so I'm kind of in favor of certification, except for the money part. I'd love to make sure that is given to everyone freely. My concern is that people are going to say something is restorative justice, but then it's not going to be. And that, I haven't seen that yet, but that's the concern about certification. But New Zealand has every part of their criminal justice process starts with the option of using a restorative justice process for the victim. And they started similarly how we're starting, with the most palatable, the kids. So people are in favor of starting this with kids, and this is how it started in New Zealand, and it was so successful that they decided to bring it to the adult criminal system. And they use it for every level of crime, not just nonviolent crime. But I've looked at their certification, and I think it would be very valuable, I think, here, except for the part about, hindering some people because of money or time out of work. I think we can get around that. We can find a way around that.
I just have to say that I go into the Walker Correction Institution, and I'm part of the Quest program.
Oh, right,
Which,
okay.
right at the end of the Quest program, we do have restorative justice / victim awareness. And, you know, of course, we tell them what restorative justice is, even though it's not going on in Florida. But we tell them what it is, and then, of course, you know, I met Agnes. My dad was murdered. And so I go in and I also talk about the victim awareness. So once they hear about the victim awareness thing, and they think about, you know, who they're victimized and everything. And so they do think about, they wish that it was restorative justice. And also, one of the victim advocates came into the prison where they brought one of the victims to speak. And I asked them, state attorney's office, I said, well, what do you think that the victim offender dialogue will ever happen? And they said yes. So it made me feel good that they are thinking about it. You know, they want it to happen too.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say that in the UK, restorative justice is in most of their systems. They're now doing restorative policing, and they're doing circles in police stations, I guess for some of these vandalism kinds of things. And I have a friend that I've been corresponding with for a while now in Afghanistan. And he went to the Eastern Mennonite University in Pennsylvania. And he's doing restorative justice and circles in the villages in Afghanistan.
And I have on my Google News feed, if you put in a topic every day, it'll email you. So I have restorative justice in there. And today, one of the stories was that Walmart is using this process for their shoplifting. And so if someone gets caught shoplifting and admits it, then the manager and someone from the neighborhood that Walmart's in and are invited to come, and they do this process. And you know, while people say, well, that's soft on crime, you know, why are we doing that? That person lives in the neighborhood, and if they have to answer and become accountable to the neighborhood and to that store, there's a high likelihood that they're not going to do that again. And that's what we see in restorative justice. The statistics that we're getting back, especially from Colorado and other states who have a more robust program, is that their recidivism rate is much lower. And so while people say it's soft on crime, it's actually high on safety, and makes for better neighbors, I think, when you have to admit accountability.
Yeah, Delaware follows their inmates that have participated in restorative justice after they're released. And they have not found anybody that participated in a restorative justice circle or dialogue that has been rearrested. Now, granted, they're smaller than we are, but that's astounding.
Actually, there were some really good programs on the radio this morning.
Oh.
NPR TED Talks.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Three of them, if you can find the podcasts. My question is, I'm confused, and it's a good confusion. Who is the victim? Because when Agnes was talking, she was not the only victim.
Right.
The person who had killed and all this. So how do you...
Now, when we're talking homicide, the ripples go in many directions. I'm a survivor. That makes me a victim. Her former husband is also a victim. Their older children are also victims. The offender, his grandmother, his family are all victims. And if there were to be a circle, I would think that we would all be there. And not only have I found healing in corresponding with him, but I've also experienced healing in some of his family members. I've gotten to know his grandmother pretty well, and his father, who was absent in his life, and several other family members. And by us all being able to talk about it, everybody has found their own way of healing from this traumatic thing that happened to everybody. And we have an ongoing support group for people that have been victim of violent crime. And my passion is that one day we will have a support group for the families of offenders. Because who do they talk with? When they get that phone call, you know, they weren't expecting it, wasn't part of their life plan probably. They have to go to work the next morning. Who do they talk with? You know, who's going to listen to them? Who's going to blame them? And there's no place for them to have any support. So that's one of my dreams.
Is there any list of resources, restorative justice, either in Leon County or Florida?
Yeah, so the Florida Restorative Justice Association is working on a directory right now. It should be up by the end of the year, or hopefully in a few months after that. But it's been difficult to try to get that. Now, the National Association of Community and Restorative Justice has kind of a list of every state that has something, some kind of program on the front page of their website. But we don't have, one of our most frequently sent emails is moving to Sarasota, and there's their restorative justice program in Sarasota. So we're only 2 years old, so I'll look and say, you know, through my membership list and say, okay, I think you can talk to this person. But for the most part, we really don't have many programs in Florida that I would say are restorative justice. Community Connections is one. Broward has a program called the Promise Program. It's in schools. There's many things in schools. And actually, Florida's doing really well as far as training for schools. I'm happy to hear about Griffin. I didn't know about that, but a few other counties have school-wide programs. But right now, yeah, you would you would have to contact us, and I would have to kind of dig through. So it's a little unsophisticated at this point.
How do we contact you?
Oh, okay. Sorry, it's floridarestorativejustice.com. And there's a website, and there's a contact us page there. I can give you my direct email as well. Yeah, sure. I think I have a handout here. Yes, I have my direct email on there as well. But yeah, I'm really sorry about that. One of the things that we really want to do is get a directory, but it's just everyone's doing this as a labor of love right now, so we have to just take people's time frame.
Yeah. So that's floridarestorativejustice.com for anybody who's interested in contacting this association. So thank you all very much. I just want to announce that next week we'll have Cindy Bigby, Dr. Cindy Bigby, who is mentioned here today, who is the director of the Community Connections, and also Dale Landry, who is kind of in charge of restorative justice in the Leon County school system and how it's being used here. So to look at how, you know, where the rubber meets the road here in Tallahassee, and it's going to be facilitated by Kate Gromere. So thank you all again very much for coming, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week.